and I'm just going to put it simply. One of the things I plan on doing now once a week, and it'll be on these Wednesday shows, is to come up with a top 5 list.
It's the ToddCast, top 5, top 5, ToddCast, top 5.
Yes, I know I'm playing to the algorithm. So what? Okay, right? I'm going to at least try to do it in ways that are intellectually interesting. And when I was coming up with this sort of a top 5 list for this first one, so it's, and I'll go all over the place. I might do underrated college football programs at some point. I'm not going to do that one today. What I was going to do is sort of who's had the best 2025 so far, if you're a Democrat, trying to position yourself as a viable candidate for 2028. It doesn't mean you're a front runner if you've made my top 5 list. It doesn't mean you poll the best if you've made my top 5 list. It simply means who's put themselves in a position that's been that's strengthened. It's put themselves in a better position today than they were at the start of this calendar year. And so I will tell you this, I think the 5 that I would put in here right now on this front, I think it's pretty clear. Nobody's had a better 6 weeks right now than Gavin Newsom, right? 6 weeks ago, who's the leader of the Democratic Party? Yet I gotten crickets. Is it Jeffries? Is it Schumer? Is it Barack Obama still? Is it Kamala Harris, right? If you offered a list, I think Kamala Harris would come out on top. Usually whoever the previous nominee of a party is, sort of always is a default pick when you ask these questions sort of in the first year after a presidential election. So, but I think unequivocally right now in this moment, Gavin Newsom's the leader of the Democratic Party. This redistricting fight has given him a voice. Obviously, he's the field general here in the response to Texas. In some ways, Republicans would love to have Gavin as the face of the party. So both of them have leaned into it. I think the base of the party's fired up that Gavin's willing to fight. Look, I'm not going to, plenty of you know what I think of this strategy long term. I think I think it's a bad move. But if you're talking about Gavin Newsom's politics at a time when the Democratic base is desperate for a fighter and they don't have one at the DNC, they don't have one with the House Democrats, they don't have one with the Senate Democrats, I get it. So Gavin's the fighter right now. And I think it is probably going to translate into, you'll start to see when they ask the very early primary polling of who's your preference to be the nominee in 28, I imagine Gavin's going to be in the first slot in the next 6 to 8 weeks. Now, he's going to have a huge test, right? If he loses this referendum, it's probably a big blow to any chances he has. And I'll admit, I'm still a bit of a skeptic that a former mayor of San Francisco can get elected president of the United States, just because of how we culturally liberal, the perception of how culturally liberal San Francisco is. And I just think we've seen how successfully the right has been able to demonize that. But I think, make no mistake, he'd be in my 1 slot is Gavin. In my 2 slot is somebody that isn't going to show up very high in the polls right now, but it's Ruben Gallego. And in fact, I have this column about there's in today's in my Substack update this week that notes that there's been 3 successful models, archetypes for Democrats to win the presidency when they've been out of power, right? And I don't count Biden. Biden is sort of the exception, right? Biden is the only president in 100 years, Democratic side, to win the presidency as a Democrat after having lost a campaign for the presidency in a previous year. Bill Clinton won the presidency the first time he ran. Barack Obama won the presidency the first time he ran. Jimmy Carter won the presidency the first time he ran. John Kennedy won the presidency the first time he ran. So, we can have a debate about whether FDR being on the ticket as a VP nominee counts or not as somebody having run before he actually ran himself for president. But that was in arguably the pre-primary era. So if you really look in the primary era of presidential politics, that has been the norm. And there's sort of different archetypes that each fit in, right? Carter was the candidate that that rose because the nation wanted to cleanse itself from the corruption of Richard Nixon and the sort of the immorality of Nixon's presidency, and his faith was grounded. In fact, there's a few candidates out there that I think might look similar to that. Bill Clinton was the guy who came in. Everybody thought he had too much baggage to win a national election, too much questions about his personal life, but he proved to be a fighter, right? Does that ring familiar? I put Gavin Newsom in that column. And then Barack Obama was sort of the fresh face that turned the page. Aren't we tired of that old politics? It's time to have a new conversation. And this is the category I put Ruben Gallego in. Here's somebody who, when he first got in, I thought, oh, he's going to be compartmentalized as the super lefty primary challenger to Kyrsten Sinema. But he effectively didn't get pigeonholed as a far left candidate. And he really moved on the issue of border security, sort of very much sort of putting himself in line in some ways to the right of Mark Kelly on some issues when it came to border security and immigration. He won a close race in a state that Donald Trump carried. That's a pretty good thing to have on your political resume right now. And look, this is a barrier that Democrats haven't broken in the presidential level, which is to nominate somebody of Latino descent either as a president or a vice president. So you put him in that sort of Barack Obama column, if you will. So I think he's had the second best summer right now behind Gavin Newsom at sort of putting themselves in to the top tier of the president. Doesn't mean I'm saying if he's not, he may not poll past 3% for the next 2 years. But I think as far as donor awareness and activist awareness, he's had a pretty good, and he's, by the way, been to both Iowa and New Hampshire this summer. And I'd say that the other candidate that I put in the 3 slot is somebody that nobody counts as a presidential candidate yet. And it's James Talarico, which is the state legislator down in Texas, who reminds me that the sort of the buzz that's growing around him actually reminds me of the buzz in 2017 around the mayor of South Bend, who ran a failed campaign for DNC chair, but became a popular person to start booking. Hey, this is a new, fresh face inside the Democratic Party. Their first their first sort of millennial spokesperson who sort of, seems to be not a little bit different than what we're used to. And it was Pete Buttigieg. And Talarico reminds me of a combination of Pete Buttigieg and Jimmy Carter. And there's a chance that is with maybe that, I don't know if that's going to be what the voters want in 28, but I think he's put himself in a position where he suddenly, people are looking for a new voice. People are looking for a younger generational change. He's checking a lot of these boxes. And, unfortunately for Pete Buttigieg, he's run before. And if the pattern holds where, it's tough to be a fresh face a second time, right? You only get to be the fresh face once. So I think he in some ways, Talarico was the face of the Democrats who fled out in Texas. Being grounded in faith, I think, is a strength, particularly in a general election that is underrated, especially if it comes from the Democratic side, right? There's this perception that Republicans are more religious than Democrats. I think that would play well in the Midwest. So I put him as number 3 on sort of having, he put himself on the map. Okay. Nobody was saying that, even thinking about him in those terms. And maybe, this is why if I were in his shoes, if I run for anything, I'd run for governor, not Senate, right? I'd stay out of the federal issues and I'd make Abbott if he decides to run statewide. But he's somebody I wouldn't be shocked to see on an early debate stage sometime in the fall of 27. And then the next 2 I'd put down as sort of 4 and 5 on this list is Andy Beshear and Wes Moore, who they've been, you're watching them. In some ways, they've been outmaneuvering, I think we all expected Josh Shapiro to be a little more aggressive, and he's been much less aggressive, sort of talking up his own potential presidential candidacy. I think he wants to secure a second term first versus, Beshear's, he's not running for reelection. He doesn't have to run again himself. And then Wes Moore, I think, is a little safer politically, right? I doubt the only person that could give Wes Moore a race in 26 would be the former governor, Larry Hogan. And while I think he joked about it on social media a couple of weeks ago, I I'd be shocked if he wanted to go through the mess of trying to navigate Trump in a Republican Party, even though the Maryland Republican Party would probably be a bit more open to him being anti-Trump than any place else. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think both Moore and Beshear have done the inside game pretty well. They both traveled to some key early states. Beshear showed up at the Hakeem Jeffries um, money gathering out on the West Coast and was sort of a featured speaker there. So he's starting to meet those donors. So, you know, in short, I think those, like I said, some people are, where's Shapiro? Where's AOC? I think AOC had a really good spring. She sort of ratcheted back, and I'm, who's the leader of the progressives? Is it Bernie Sanders or is it AOC? And I think until the handoff is complete, it feels like Bernie Sanders is not ready to give up the torch, right? He still wants to be the leader of the progressive movement. And so until that's fully handed off to her, that's why I don't quite her. I certainly put her out there as a wild card in this, and I think she's a formidable candidate if she runs. Don't get me wrong, but I do think the fact that Bernie's not ready to leave the stage, and to sort of hand the organization fully to her yet, and maybe he will, and maybe that is the plan come 2026 and 2027. But that is why I've left her off this list. I've left Whitmer off this list because I do think the shine has faded a little bit with her, fairly or unfairly. I think the Michigan looks like it wouldn't be good for Whitmer's chances if she's replaced by an independent or a Republican. So, and I that's why I don't think this has been a great summer for her, if you will, on that front. And I do think that infamous photo is one that's always going to leave with her, where she's in the Trump Oval Office, which has been good for Michigan, working with Trump. I think she's figured that out, but she can't be afraid of it. And I think putting up that folder is a moment that is going to be hard to shake for her long term, right? That's one of those pictures you feel like that could just haunt her, if you will. So my top 5 this week is the 5 potential presidential candidates who've had the best summer and who've probably made the most progress at getting to their goal of being a viable top-tier presidential candidate. Gavin Newsom in the 1 slot, Ruben Gallego in the 2, Talarico in the 3, Beshear and Moore. I'll put them in either order. I guess I'd go Beshear 4, Moore 5, but we could swap it, and it wouldn't be a huge argument there.